35 years ago, if you were starting a company, especially a direct-to-consumer business, how did you do it? You had basically two options. You either opened a physical store or you printed a catalog. You weren't going on a website to buy. I remember learning in school, what's the most important thing when you're starting a company and opening a new store? Location, location, location. But it's not really about location. What they really meant to say when they taught location, 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 what they really meant was traffic, traffic, traffic.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Human in the Loop. On today's episode, I have the privilege of talking with John Merris. And John has had a lot of experience in the e-commerce world and traditional retail world as well. And John walks through some of his experience in the beginning of the episode, but he was the CEO of Solo Stove and then Solo Brands and a couple other companies as well. And so he's really, really qualified to talk through a lot of his experiences and also a lot of just what's happening in the industry today. And so my general goal for this episode is to pull out that knowledge and experience that John has that we can all benefit from wide movements in the market, and getting into just what's happening with consumers today, how we as sellers should be thinking about and approaching e-commerce, and how he sees things changing going in through 2024 and beyond. There's a lot here. I honestly wish we had more time, and I think we're gonna have to do maybe another episode with John in the later half of this year. But John talks a lot about multi-channel. He talks a lot about Walmart and how we should be thinking about and approaching Walmart. I think one of the core themes that this episode has is bringing things back to simplicity. One of John's biggest points is the drive to bring things back to simplicity, to not let the complexity get in our way, preventing us from growing. And he talks a lot about content. There's a good conversation we have about content as well, and how it's easy to get lost in the complexity of the competition and almost shiny object syndrome. But if there's one thing I hope that you take away from this episode, it's to come back to simplicity and to hold on to simplicity as you progress and grow in 2024. That being said, let's see what John Merris has to say about the state of e-commerce, strategy, and everything in between. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. I am joined today by none other than John Merris, the man himself. John, thank you so much for joining us today on Human in the Loop. The goal of this is to recount a bit of your experience, walk through kind of what you've been through, and also to gain your perspective on just what's been happening in the marketplace recently. You have really good perspective, and just your time has been spent in the weeds with a lot of this stuff in e-commerce. So my goal is to pull out a lot of that to help our audience understand big shifts in the marketplace, big shifts in e-commerce, and what they can do about that. So John, again, thank you for being here. I think a good place to start is with your experience. So if you could help people understand a bit about your story, what you've been involved with.
Yeah. First off, thanks, Cam. It's great to be with you today. So out of my undergrad, I was serial entrepreneur. Started my own company out of my undergrad. Ran a residential alarm company for 4.5 years. Went and grabbed my MBA from the University of Texas in Austin, and then coming out of that, held a variety of sales and kind of growth roles in different industries. I really have not been an industry guy. And I think as we talk and I lace in my experience, you'll find I'm not like a specialist in this or in that or whatever. I've really bounced all over the place. But what has been consistent about my career is that I've focused in high growth, high profit businesses. I love businesses where there's a lot of interaction with the customer, with the consumer.
Yep.
And that's really kind of where my career has led me. The first couple of companies out of my MBA were private equity backed. So I kind of got a good flavor of what private equity did and had an opportunity to be in businesses that were really in the market to grow and to get ready for a future transaction, which is obviously heavy private equity, right? They're in it to make a profit. And then where my career really took a turn and kind of pretty significant paradigm shift was taking a CEO job back in 2018 with a company at the time, a very obscure, small direct-to-consumer business called Solo Stove.
Yep.
And I joined the company when we were about 11 million of revenue, trailing 12 revenue. And we had maybe, I don't know, less than 10 employees.
Wow.
From
No way.
2018 to the beginning of this year, I was there. So roughly 5 years, just over 5 years. During that time, we grew from 11 million of revenue to over 500 million of revenue. We did a few acquisitions during that time as well and created a parent company, Solo Brands. We ended up owning Solo Stove Chubbies, pretty popular direct-to-consumer men's apparel business, Oru Kayak, Isle Paddleboards, TerraFlame, and Icy Breeze. So we had this really cool conglomeration or combination of direct-to-consumer businesses, primarily direct-to-consumer. Ended up expanding, doing some channel stuff and getting into retail and some wholesale and international expansion, open up a facility in Rotterdam, Netherlands, in Australia. So really cool run there. And then in January, I took off. I maybe also call out in case there's any Snoop Dogg fans that actually culminated with this incredible Snoop campaign that we did last year where we got Snoop Dogg to give up smoke. Some of you may remember that, but that was me. Kind of behind that. And then January, left Solo, took 90 days off, and just in the last few weeks, started as the CEO of Floret, which is a direct-to-consumer luxury vinyl laminate and engineered hardwood business. So we do anything flooring related, all US-based, founder-owned still, much smaller and scrappier, kind of back to the 2018 Solo days. So super pumped to kind of be starting afresh and trying my hand at kind of growing something from, the 8-figure to the, to the nine figure. So we'll see how it goes.
There's a lot going on here, like international involvement in retail, traditional and e-commerce media. Like there's so much. Side note is the smoke campaign was one of my favorite marketing moves. Like that, like I thought it was so brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant campaign, and it really stuck with me. Like I actually thought he gave up smoking. I was like, that's crazy. But there's a lot going on here, and you're especially qualified to talk through general movements in the market. I think actually I want to ask, like, how much of the growth that you've instilled in every place that you've been in, what percentage would you say you've allocated into e-commerce specifically? This is an e-commerce podcast, but it's not just about e-commerce. That's a big part of this conversation.
Yeah, so it's varied by companies and roles, but if I just look at my last 5 years at Solo, we were roughly 500 million of revenue last year, and we were in the 70 to 80% range direct to consumer e-com.
Yeah.
So you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. For sure, just via e-com, and definitely the vast majority.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. The first question is just kind of pulling out general thought on what you think the biggest shift is that you've seen in e-commerce. So obviously there's a lot going on here. I want to try to stick to like maybe the last 3-year period of time. How would you say, and this could be from consumer behavior to technology to marketplace dynamics, let's say 1 to 2 of the biggest shifts in e-commerce that you've seen over the last 3 years? What do you think? It's a big question.
It is a big question, and I want to be pointed in it in my answer, and hopefully be relevant and helpful to the listeners. I think that the first one that I would call out is that obviously it goes without saying that it's harder today to sell online than it was 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, it was harder than it was 5 years before that, right? So it's, as a theme, it's become more challenging on the one hand. And that's what everybody hears about. That's what we read about. That's what we go to conferences and everybody wants to talk about. The reason, and this is really interesting, it's like a juxtaposition, that it's gotten harder is because it's gotten easier to sell online. And it's a really, it's like it'll like twist in your mind But the reality is that anyone can go online and start selling stuff and do pretty well. The playing field is way more level today than it's ever been for somebody with no brand and no online experience to go online and compete with you. And because of that competition, it's gotten super hard to go big online, in my opinion. I think that's the first one. The second one is, I think another big change that's happened is in the quest for attribution, for accurate attribution. I feel like today it's worse than it's ever been because there's so many inputs, and every platform has realized that the more credit that they take for attribution, the more that companies will spend with them. So it's become super gamey. And all of these platforms are just continuing to figure out ways to take more and more credit, when the reality is that it's a combination of all of these inputs that's driving success and failure. They all raise their hand for the sale. None of them raise their hand for the failure or the rising ROAS or CAC or whatever it is that you're using as your metric. Because of that, I think that it's become muddier and muddier. It used to be simple, right? Like when it was just Facebook, like in 2012, 2013, like you just attribute everything to Facebook. Now, like you're doing Pinterest and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube and Google search, and then you're layering in podcasts and linear TV and CTV, and then you're doing events and you're trying to figure out like, where are we getting the best bang for our buck? And the reality is you start like taking spend away from one and leaning into another, and you start realizing that, gosh, it seems like when we spend on Facebook, we do better on Google. Well, guess what? You do, but Google's taking all the credit, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. So those are the two I'd call out. I think that it's been harder to win because it's easier to compete. But on the other hand, the encouraging side of that is like, if you're trying to get started, like you totally can. And like, I don't care if you're trying to compete against the best brands in the world, you could do it. And like, you can get serious slices of I mean, look at what, and again, there's like a whole nother, I mean, I could go on this. Like, look at Hoka and On Running and what they've done to Nike. Like
absolutely.
It's remarkable. And these shoe brands didn't exist a decade ago. None of us had heard of those guys.
No.
And so it's just crazy. Like it's crazy how equal the playing field has become.
I think both of those things are connected. I think that both of those things, that almost the juxtaposition of like complexity, things are getting more complex. Because of that, the entry, but more accessible. Access is so much greater. As access increases for both sellers and to separate marketplaces, the complexity naturally is going to increase as well. The number of pieces in play increases. And that changes a lot. And that's really good insight. I think that's good. I think one big topic that I wanted to ask you too is about multi-channel, is about how to do the expansion into those. So the market's gotten more complex. The number of marketplaces that are trying to get your attention, get you to spend money on their advertising platforms, right? Still, it's a necessary evil almost to expand onto those marketplaces. How are you able to do that successfully? What advice would you give to people to expand? Walmart's become a big topic recently. How do you expand on these different?
It's a great, like, I love this topic. And the reason I love it is because 30 years ago, it's crazy because we used to just say 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But 35 years ago, if you were starting a company, especially a direct-to-consumer business, and you had products to sell, how did you do it, right? Like you had basically two options. You either opened a physical store or you printed a catalog. Like that's how you sold. Like the internet was not a thing. Like you weren't going on a website to buy. Even those of us that like remember those days forget that. Like that was in my lifetime. Granted, I was younger. I wasn't in my career yet. I graduated from high school in '01. But like, I remember the days, like in the '90s, in the early '90s, like that's how it went. And yet, like, I remember learning in school and even like through graduate school, if you were opening a physical store with a product, what's the most important thing when you're starting a company and opening a new store? And everybody that, when I say this, they're like, oh yeah, it's location, location, location. That's all that mattered. Get the right location. You could have even an okay product, and your chances of success go up however many fold, right? But it's not really about location. What they really meant to say when they taught location, location, location to us in school, even when we were younger kids, is what they really meant was traffic, traffic, traffic. Mm. But at the time, the internet didn't exist. So they said location, location, location. The reality is that any business needs eyeballs. Any business needs traffic, whether it's online traffic, physical traffic, phone traffic, catalog traffic. If people aren't seeing you and seeing your products or service, they can't buy them. Mm. And so going back to the whole conversation around multi-channel and marketplace is you have to do it, because what marketplaces have done exceptionally well, Amazon, Walmart, eBay, go down the list, is drive what? Eyeballs, traffic. It's just another digital location. Yep. And it's a really good one because of how much traffic they drive. And so to anyone that's starting a business, and I don't even care if you're calling it an e-commerce business, any business has to consider what role marketplace is going to play in their business because of how much traffic is flowing through those marketplaces today.
Tell me about, I want to pull out a specific example of this to help people give a better idea. Walmart has become just like kind of a bigger area conversation. So what experience have you had kind of navigating? I think that's a good example of Amazon was the behemoth in e-commerce, is the behemoth in e-commerce. Walmart is a question in people's minds for, should I expand? Is there traffic there? Are there people buying there?
Right.
How did you handle that debate back and forth with putting money into something like that?
The way that I would think about it is you have to ask yourself, like, what is Walmart and what is Amazon? Interestingly enough, I don't know about you, but I know my shopping habits, and I know what in the past I've used Walmart for, or retailers like Walmart, versus what I've used Amazon for, and they're different. Yep. They aren't the same. Even though the media likes to build up the Walmart, especially the Walmart.com story, as like trying to take out Amazon, I actually don't even know that it's that. Amazon is very much about, it has become a search focused platform or marketplace, meaning that you know what you're looking for and then you go there and you buy it. Walmart has a much bigger discovery component to it, because retailers historically line the shelves with products that both you know and you do not know. So as you're walking the aisles, you see what you need, but then you also start learning, like, oh, what's that? I see that on the shelf. You pick that up, you hold it, you figure that out. And because of that, I think that the angle from which Walmart has approached e-com is more from that, yes, you can find the stuff you need today, but there's a big discovery component to Walmart.com that I think they're filling a need that Amazon maybe didn't even ever intend or want to fill, because that was not their purpose. And so I actually think that there's a really great place for both of those marketplaces for different reasons. And I totally see a world where they coexist in very meaningful ways.
I think a core piece of what you said is treating them differently. I think a lot of people think of them as the same thing, just with a different skin. I think that's a good core principle to approach even just multi-channel with, what understanding the nature of who is buying on the marketplace, what the traffic looks like. Technology and content. I want to touch on those real quick. the emergence of technology and its involvement and its importance in e-commerce today. What does that mean to you when you're growing a brand, D2C, whatever it is? How has technology allowed you to do that at an accelerated rate?
I mean, it is amazing, right? I mean, it's remarkable, the tools that are out there. I would warn the listeners from my perspective at how dangerous that technology creep becomes to a business. Because it's really easy to chase the shiny objects. Like, they're everywhere. And like, they're literally being created on a daily basis. Like, there's a new e-commerce tool. I think that, back to the whole point, the complexity that we were talking about at the very beginning, I think that simple is better, and they're not all created equal. And I think that there's incredible tech out there, and then there's really bad tech. And there's a much bigger emphasis for me in any company that I run now. I'm like super resistant to new tech. And I instead of like my first answer being yes, my first answer is always no now. And I really force my team to answer the hard questions of like, what is this going to do that what we already have doesn't do? Or what is it going to do better? And if it's going to do something better, then what are we replacing this with? And that's it. It requires a lot more discipline, because you find very quickly that your team who is really enamored by a new tech, when you tell them they have to drop a piece of tech to put this in, they like really think about it hard. Like, how bad do I need this? But I do think that technology is amazing. I think that if you're willing to do the work and do the diligence right, that there is a lot of good to be found, but it's not everywhere. And just because somebody says you got to have this, or even, it's a pretty incestuous community, unfortunately, too. And so bad tech sometimes still takes off because they have enough relationships from a prior role or something where they pull in a core group, and it's dangerous. I've seen it's crazy.
I think it ties back to you mentioned complexity involvement with technology. Technology makes things more complex, which doesn't have to be a bad thing. But when you get into the nature of a brand connecting with its audience, retaining its humanity and its core like brand identity, perhaps technology kind of muddies the waters a little bit sometimes when connecting with an audience. I think there's a lot to be said there. I like that take, though. I think simplicity is a really good way to approach something like this, while also retaining the importance of leveraging technology to grow at a rapid pace. Content, the importance of content, and content is a very broad term. I'm imagining more like the emergence of TikTok and the vertical form video, quick form video, and what that does to a brand and how important it is. How would you say you've leveraged that? What's an example of how you've leveraged that, and how brands should be leveraging that and as they grow?
I think that one of the biggest learnings and changes from a content perspective in the last several years is what you perceive as better content is not always better content. And the cost to create content does not equate to better results in a lot of instances. What's happened in the world of content and content consumption with consumers is that we've all become so used to now consuming amateur content that our appetite for amateur content from brands has actually gone up because it feels too salesy and too inauthentic if it's too buttoned up, especially on certain channels. And so what I've had to really drive my content teams to do with the last several companies I'm at is to really think about dumbing it down, shooting things just on your iPhone sometimes, going out, coming up with an idea and, leaving the office and coming back with a piece of content 30 minutes later that you're going to put on the site or put on a platform and seeing what happens. You have to be willing to iterate. Content is still king, But I think that it's a lot different than it was 10 years ago, and really different than what it was 20 years ago. Chubby's is a great example of that. I mean, the content that Chubby's puts out is phenomenal. And I don't know, I may be overstating, but I bet you 50% of the content coming out of Chubby's is like a few people in the office, like, this would be a really funny shot. Let's go get it really quick. Somebody go throw those swim trunks on and like, let's go down to the park.
Yeah.
And we have that versus spending $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 on a professional shoot and then having people, and there's a place for both, but I think content is king still. It's so important. It just looks a lot different.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see how that, the importance of that organic type of content where it doesn't even feel like you're being sold to. Yeah. I feel like that's correlated and connected to younger generation. And as that younger generation has more buying power, how that will change things as well. But I think there's something to be said. Again, maybe going back to the theme of this conversation of simplicity versus complexity, of just the simple nature of recording a video for a product on your phone, that authentic experience speaking really, really clearly to an audience. I like that. Well, that's honestly, I think the last question I have is the final one, is just reflecting on where you think things are going to go. So we've talked about a lot about multi-channel technology. How do you see e-commerce specifically changing over the course of 2024, 2025 and beyond?
I think that e-com is going to more and more feel integrated with your overall shopping experience with any brand. And I think what I mean by that is, in the future, I don't think that you're going to have physical and digital retail like bifurcated. I actually think that it's going to feel like one experience, and you're going to see the retail, the in-person retail physical store experience be so intertwined with what's happening on e-com, shared inventory, shared experience, et cetera, that you might not even like call it e-com anymore. You might not even call it like online. You're just like, oh, I'm going to shop at this retailer, I'm going to shop this brand. And it's just one immersive experience, whether it's in person or online. That's where I think that it's going. I don't know exactly all of the forms that that's going to rear its head, but I've seen very small snippets of stuff that I'm really interested in. I mean, imagine being able to just shop on a brand's website, but pick up the product at Dick's Sporting Goods or at Home Depot, where you're not even on HomeDepot.com, but you're buying. There's small elements of this already happening, and I think it's just gonna explode in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that to me says where the convenience from the consumer side of just being able to buy whatever you want anywhere, basically.
Everything's going to go towards making it easier for the consumer. And as soon as technology and humans kind of figure out how to solve that, it's going to roll out. Right. And so instead of needing to go necessarily to Walmart.com to buy a product, you find a brand that you love. And then at checkout, it's like, oh, do you want to pick this up at your local Walmart? Like, buy it here, and it's sitting in the customer, you can go drive into the customer pickup line and they're pulling out like the Crest toothpaste.
Yeah.
That you just bought on Crest website. There's maybe not a great example with a commodity like that, but with brand specific items and more discretionary stuff, I think that's the future.
Interconnected, convenient, and simple. John, thank you.
And that's the theme of this episode for sure. Is simplicity.
Yep.
And just, the KISS model, right? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Keeping it simple in a world that seems to be getting more and more complex as time goes on. I think that's a really good takeaway for this episode. John, we're out of time. I want to thank you again for taking time to be here. We could honestly dove into any single one of these topics for an entire episode, but I think we covered a lot of ground. So thank you for taking time to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Cam.